Okay, good evening, everyone. We are live. Good evening. Hope you're okay. Welcome back to the Bhakti Lens podcast. We make a humble attempt to look at the world through the eyes of love and devotion, otherwise known as Bhakti in Sanskrit. We are the podcast for the College of Vedic Studies, Birmingham. And if you don't know, we run courses on various subjects. We've got courses on Sanskrit, the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. We look at Dharma and much, much more. So if you want to join one of our courses, please message us and just get involved. We've got a really good bunch, a good team of teachers. So please join in. So for this evening, we've got a treat for you guys. We have Mayuran Senthilnathan.
That's right, you got it.
Okay. And he's a speaker of the Bhakti Marg organization and the author of Avatars of the Masters. He comes from a Vaishnav tradition, is a family man, and shares the same profession as myself, being a dentist. So it'll be strange for both of us a strange experience to not talk about teeth, actually, and talk about spirituality, which suits us both, I'm sure. He's also the creator of a YouTube channel called Dharma Speaks, which has 60,000 subscribers. And the videos focus on explaining Vedic philosophy and spiritual practices using Mayuran's profound insights. And he very recently published a book called The Hypocrite Within, which we will dedicate the final part of this podcast to explore that. And what the book is about, which we'll get into, are the characters of the Mahabharata and this important topic of spiritual hypocrisy. So welcome everyone, and welcome Mayuran. How are you doing?
Jai Gurudev, Jessel. Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me today.
No problem. Enjoyed your day off, I'm sure. Is it bank holiday for you as well?
I've had a few days off, so it's going to be strange, what it's like picking up a handpiece after being away for about 4 or 5 days. But no, I've enjoyed it.
That's good. So before we get into like your inspirations and activities in the world of Bhakti, just tell us a bit about you and your background, your journey into spirituality and then into Bhakti. If you could, that would be great.
Well, I think I was born into a Hindu family. I'm Tamil Sri Lankan. My parents are religious, and I was, from a very young age, I was going to the mandir every week. I was very, very active. And then I used to go to India loads. So I used to do pilgrimages to different temples, go to different ashrams. And then probably around 2005, I reached this point where I was kind of like very disillusioned with spirituality, with religion, with the idea of God. Does God even exist, right? This kind of haunting questions were coming at me. And so during that time, I was kind of drifting towards a kind of, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris kind of hyper-rational, hyper-cynical mindset. And that's the kind of path I was going down. And then a friend of mine came and told me about his spiritual master, Paramahamsa Vishwananda, and told me some amazing things. And so I went to Germany to meet him for the first time. Again, with my hyper-cynical, hyper-arrogant mind. And I remember when I saw him for the first time, there was just this huge sense of familiarity that when I first met him. And then it's kind of like if you come home from work and you see your wife and your kids, you have that familiarity. But if you imagine meeting someone for the first time and having that really strong familiarity. So that's what happened first of all. But then I remember asking him lots of questions and, firing lots of questions at him, trying to, work out, does God really exist and all this kind of stuff. And he kept dodging my questions, and he really enjoyed the fact that I was so wound up about, trying to find rational answers to things. And then I said to him with these questions, I said, you're confusing me with your answers. And then he said to me, well, you're already confused. And so if you're confused, I'll confuse you double. And he said, what can I do? I'm just a mirror. And so I was there scratching my head, going, what's going on here? And then he asked me, do you want to meditate? And then so I meditated. I did a short meditation. which is quite a strange experience to meditate in front of somebody in a room, a stranger effectively in a room looking at you. So I meditated, and he asked me, how was your meditation? And then I said, yeah, it was amazing. And then he said it was awful. And then, yeah, and I had this kind of baffle. That was my first experience with my guru, Paramahamsa Vishwananda. And then I left very baffled. And then I came back a few times. I still didn't realize why I was there. My mind was going, why are you coming? You know, do you even believe in God? What's wrong with you? But I just felt this constant pull towards this path, towards him. And then after a phenomenal amount of amazing experiences, I suddenly realized that this is where I belong. He was my guru. He's my spiritual master. And this path of bhakti, this is what this is all about. This calling happened. And it's just this kind of, these experiences rescued me from that hyper-rationalism, that intellectualism that seeks absolute emphatic answers for everything. And the thing that really hit home is that there's this quote from Pascal. Are you ready for some French, Jethel?
Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah.
Right, okay, so I did some GCSE French, and this quote from Pascal, he said, Le cœur a ses raisons que la raison ne connaît pas. Okay, can you work that out? Yeah.
The heart something?
Yeah, the heart has its reasons of which reason knows not, right?
Wow.
Yeah, and it totally sums up my experience with my spiritual master on this path. And what he was trying to tell me was that if you really want to walk this path with me, if you want to really walk this bhakti path, if you really want to know God, then you have to learn to trust what you have inside of you. You have to learn to trust that calling and that longing that you have inside of you. And for someone who is really in the mind, I mean, the mind is terribly important. You got to have an aim. You got to have the right knowledge. You got to have the right, understandings. But it's the bhakti happens in the heart. And unless we're willing to trust what's inside our heart, then, where is the bhakti going to come from ultimately? And so, we chant this mantra like Agyana Timidandasya, how the guru, we're born into this world blind, right? And then the guru opens our eyes by anointing our eyes. And that's really what Guruji has done for me, because now I read the Bhagavad Gita. I read a lot of the Srimad Bhagavatam before I met him. But now with that revelation, I come to Krishna's words and it just takes on a whole new meaning. I now have the firm conviction God exists. And not only does he exist, he's accessible for me, he's accessible for you. And this bhakti path has direct access to him. And this is what my guru's taught me, and this is what he's revealed to me. And this is the foundation for everything I do. I mean, whether it's I'm a professional as a dentist, or whether I'm a family man or in my service, whatever it is, this is the foundation, the lens that governs everything that I do.
That's really nice. I'm just going to amplify what you've just said, if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that goes, we look for param satyam, we look for the paramount truth, and in looking for that truth, that rational search for truth, we find God, we find self-realization, we find that harmony. That's what we find. So we're always looking for something real, and in finding something real, we do actually find Ishwar, Paramatma, Bhagavan, Krishna. So it's nice that what it sounds like is that you're on a quest for some answers, something real, something tangible, and actually, because it's beyond rationality, rhyme and reason, it's to do with the heart, right? Bhakti is to do with the heart.
Absolutely.
It goes beyond that. So that, I really like that.
The thing is, the mind, it's part of this material world. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, right, that the mind is part of Prakriti, it's part of this world. But the heart knows something the mind doesn't understand. Your mind can tell you how to practically live in the world, but the heart tells you the dharma of your soul. And this is the kind of the frightening thing I had to realize was when I first met my guru, was that if I really want to experience God, if I really, really want to know God, I have to take that leap of faith and actually trust what I have inside of me, what's awakened inside of me. And that has been the thing that just opens the floodgates to grace. When we're able to do that, and when our heart's been awakened in that way through the grace of the Guru and the grace of Krishna, or the grace of God, if we can trust that, then we start to see the presence. And what I really want to, in my writings and even in my YouTube channel and everything else, I want to make people realize God is real and he's accessible. And it's the Bhakti path, the spiritual path is not in vain.
That's great. And also the language of the heart is different, isn't it? The language of the heart, like love and devotion, like when you weigh up mercy and justice, you use the word grace there. I'm just going to reflect that back to you as well, that we can't understand grace because we have this term causeless mercy. Like to receive mercy, to really receive it, means you're getting something you don't deserve. And that's the nature of the heart, right? So that goes beyond intellectual, rational thinking.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I'm reminded, and I write about this in the Hypocrite Within, this episode where Duryodhana and Arjuna come to meet Krishna before the battle, right? So I think a lot of people might know this story, but this is just before the war's about to begin, and both parties, the Pandavas and the Kauravas, want Krishna on their side, and so they journey to Dwaraka to meet Krishna. And then Duryodhana arrives first, and Arjuna arrives second and sits at his feet. Krishna opens his eyes from his resting, and he sees Arjuna, offers him the choice: either you have me unarmed, right, unwilling to fight, or you have my amazing Narayana Sena army, which is, formidable in every way. And Arjuna chooses Krishna, right? What gives him that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And Duryodhana's sitting there thinking, what have you done? This is nuts. You're choosing a personality who is unarmed. He has, he's not going to use his chakra to destroy all the armies, right? He hasn't got any weapons. He's just a guy with two hands, right? But Arjuna understands the reasons of the heart, whereas Duryodhana only understands the arrogance of the mind. And so he judges Krishna externally, whereas Arjuna trusts what he has inside, and now heart has another perspective, another lens of viewing reality that the mind has no access to. And so once we learn to trust our heart, and we can find that inside of ourselves, Krishna, God, the God's grace, Guru's grace becomes real.
That's nice. So that's really nice. You've shared what you're kind of going through, meeting your Guru and everything. Could you just share a little bit, especially because our students some of them are new to studying Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. Could you tell us, before we talk about your YouTube channel, what kind of literature were you surrounding yourself with around that sort of time, 2005 and, around that time?
2005. It's going back a bit. So I had read the Bhagavad Gita. I had read the philosophy, but I read it, like I said, with an intellectual mind. I didn't read it with that sense of with the eyes of grace, shall we say, something like that. And so I had intellectualized it like that. I had read all the new age books you can imagine, right? The Deepak Chopras and all that kind of stuff. I'd been flooded with that beforehand, but I only really started to understand the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita after I met my Guru. In fact, like I said, all these books were on the shelf. And then after I met my Guru, somehow I managed to bring them into my heart. So that's kind of what I was surrounded by at the time. And then that's really where I've been going. But reading wise, I was always reading philosophy and things like that, just general Western philosophy, Indian philosophy, because I just had a hyperactive mind. And when you had my mind wanted to eat knowledge, right? So that's kind of where it was. Wherever I could grab it, I would just grab it. But it had no direction. It had no aim to drive me forward. But it's only, like I said, after 2005, after that meeting my spiritual master, that's when everything started to coalesce and make sense.
Nice. And then I wanted to, my super tech guy in the background will hopefully bring up some pictures of your YouTube channel. I just wanted to ask you, what was your inspiration for creating this this YouTube channel, which is, I personally find it very, very, informative and engaging, and I'm impressed with the number of views and everything like that. I mean, we'll see this one here, Hinduism versus atheism. It's got like 132,000 views. So
Yeah,
tell us about how
that video is probably a depiction of my current self versus my old self, right? So it's an interesting video. If you want to get an insight into what the difference in psychology is, you can probably see it in that video.
I mean,
but
this
yeah,
one
no,
here, fact or fiction. Here you got like nearly 260,000 views there. Like it's nice. It's nice to see that there's some traction here. So yeah, please tell us about your journey into making these videos.
Well, I think in the ashram in Germany, so the main center of Bhakti Marga is called Sri Peternilia, which is near Frankfurt, Germany. So I used to go there. I've been going there every weekend. Before the lockdown, every other weekend at least, something like all the festivals, I'd be there. So a lot with the guys and some of the swamis as well. There, we used to have lots of interesting discussions, debates. About religion, about theology, philosophy. And we also used to debate a lot about interreligion, right, as well. So how religions are different. And there are obviously so many common questions that get leveled at Hinduism. Why are your gods so human? Why do you worship idols? I hate the term idols, but that's the kind of way it's phrased. Atheism, it's totally irrational what you're doing. All these kind of things are just pressing questions which Hindus are struggling to answer. We're kind of like rummaging around bitty answers, trying to consolidate them and make us sound credible. But to whose eyes are we trying to be credible to, right? We're trying to be so often credible in the eyes of the Western mind, right? In the eyes of the Abrahamic religious mindset, right? And it doesn't mean to say you have to be a Christian or Muslim or from the Jewish faith to even have an Abrahamic mindset. Even just an ordinary person in the West has an Abrahamic vision of God. And so what we try and do is we try and look at Sanatana Dharma and all the practices within Hinduism and try and justify it and squeeze it into the kind of box of the Abrahamic theology and say, look, it does make sense. Please, legitimize us because we do make sense, right? And a lot of what I try and do in Dharma Speaks is actually deconstruct the whole thing and say, look, we are not the same because our theologies are completely different. Our very seed theologies emerge into different directions completely. And once you understand the seed theologies, then you start to understand why our practices are the way they are. And not only are they rational, they are amazing, profound, and you start to see the truth in them. And what we need to do, I think, as Hindus and Bhaktas on the spiritual path, we need to find the right articulation of how to represent Bhakti. I mean, a typical example, right? The Abrahamic theology is what you might call a salvation theology, right? And a salvation theology is geared towards and this is a very general description, because I know there's nuances in each religion, but just a general description of the theology is that life is seen as a test where you have to subscribe to the right belief system. If you're in the right belief system and do the right works, then you go to heaven. If you don't, cast down to hell. That's an oversimplification, obviously, but that's a kind of salvation theology. The Hindu theology works completely different. You can call it a self-realization theology, whereby life is not seen as a test. It's seen as an experience and a process of evolution over time. And so over many lives, and a process of evolution to the first-hand experience of the divine. And that's once you understand they're going in different directions like that, suddenly what seemed like chaos and irrationality in Hinduism suddenly seems amazing and profound and totally relevant to how we see life and reality. And so Dharma Speaks is really trying to trace it all down to the bottom, is what I try and do in a lot of the videos, and give Hindus the articulation so they don't feel this inferiority complex and this kind of embarrassment sometimes, I think, when we're trying to articulate Bhakti in particular. You're trying to explain the stories and the leelas of Krishna, or Vishnu's avatars, or why this worship is done like this. And it can be a minefield if you don't have the right understanding of our theology. So I'm trying as much as I can to push that through in the Dharma Speaks videos.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, just from what you're saying, I'm gonna just offer something to yourself and the viewers. You started off by saying this beautiful this shlok, which is Om Gyananti Mirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Miritamyane Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. It's about the Guru opening the eyes, right? So it's like about having the right vision, the right dristi. And then I wanted to offer something from the Brahma Samhita, which resonates with what you're saying, which is Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti, right? So it's like Premanjana, it's like looking with the eyes of love, right? You're looking like that. And it's like, you can't find that in literature. You can't find that in rhyme and reason and what you're doing. And I've watched a lot of your videos, and I'm going to urge anyone who's tuning in to please look up Dharma Speaks and subscribe as well. I'm going to do that bell or whatever it is that you do. You subscribe to it, have a look at the videos, because what is actually happening, and this is what I feel is happening, is that you're actually giving vision. You're actually giving vision, like you're saying, you're giving the words to articulate, certain situations or how to answer certain things. But what I really do like is that you're giving the Vedic version, the Dharmic version of vision. So I really like that. So thank you for your efforts with that. And what's the latest video? What's the latest one you've done?
So the latest one I've done was about it was eternal truth versus you can call dynamic truth. It's a bit complicated to explain, but it's only a 12-minute video. But it's this Abrahamic model of the fact that truth begins in a certain way, but then like scriptures get updated, or a new revelation comes, and then suddenly the goalposts move, right? And then you have to go down a different direction. That's the Abraham. It's dynamic. Truth is moving, right? Whereas with the idea of in Sanatana Dharma is Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vedanta. The truth is one, but the wise speak of it in many different ways. There is one ultimate truth, and we're all journeying to it from different angles. And yes, obviously there are disagreements about exactly what level of truth we reach and so on. But nonetheless, we are all coalescing towards that truth, which is defined by that which is eternal, right? That's the definition of truth. That which is eternal, which is the Atman and Brahman, right? And Brahman in a Bhakti sense, Narayana, Krishna, and Atman, our divine self. And so once we contact eternity, we have contacted truth. How you get there is going to change, right? Sometimes you want to go to Vrindavan or Sri Rangam, you either you can take an aeroplane, you can walk, you can take helicopter or a train or boat, whatever it is. And so they are very different experiences. But if you end up in Sri Rangam, that's where you're going, right? And so that difference, like that dichotomy, is what I was trying to show in that last video. This video I'm just cutting now is actually about, I think it's about how sometimes there's a common accusation, because there's been a lot of Hindu temples that have been kind of destroyed. It's been in the news and social media a lot. And one kind of caption that came up on my feed was, if you believe, and there's a guy carrying his murti, right, his deity, from the temple because it's been destroyed, and he's trying to save his murti. And the caption reads, "That awkward moment when you're saving the God who's supposed to save you," right? And it's a mocking tweet against kind of Hindus and idol worship, deity worship. And I'm kind of, the next video I'm putting together is a kind of explanation as to how murti worship works, and the process of bhakti through the image, and this kind of paradox between the image being material but also divine at the same time. So yeah, that's the kind of next video I'll be out hopefully this week sometime. Maybe it should be released.
Brilliant, good. And Mohan, my put the link on there, so for everyone, please do check that out. I wanted to, before we get on to your latest book, I wanted to just maybe get a little bit about Avatars of the Master. You know, tell us a little bit about that, or even your inspiration of just starting to write. Maybe we can start with that.
My inspiration to write was, I think I used to talk to my wife. I had these habits of just ranting to my wife just for no reason. And I start talking about this philosophy and that philosophy. And this is what I think. And this is what I've a lot of experiences with Guruji and my life with Paramahamsa Vishwananda. And I just say, this is what Guruji was doing. This is what he meant. This is what I learned. This is the experience I had. And then she just said, look, instead of just talking about it all the time, just put it down in writing. Just start writing. And then I started to explain Leelas from the Bhagavatam, like Nishingadev and things like that, and how this all works together. And I just started writing, and then I got the blessings from Guruji to write this book. And what Avatars of the Master is, it's based on 5 of the incarnations of Narayana. So Matsya, Kurma, there's Mohini Avatar in there as well, Varaha Avatar, Nishingadev, Vamana Avatar. And I'll use this concept. There's a concept called Nitya Leela, right? That these Bhagavatam Leelas, these stories, these narrations, they're not just stories. They are eternal happenings. They are constantly going on. You can say they're historical, fine. You can say they're symbolic, fine. But they are Nitya Leelas fundamentally, means they are constantly being played out all the time, which means that if we have the trust, if I can meditate on these Leelas, I enter these Leelas, right? That's the goal. That the Krishna Leela is played out in the 10th book of the Bhagavatam. But it's not just we just read it and say, yeah, this happened and this happened and this happened, right? It's a meditation. And as we meditate into it, we enter into the Nitya Leela, and then it plays out in front of us. And Avatars of the Master is an invitation for the reader to enter into that Leela and see how divinity, how the master, I've used the term the master, is coming into your life. Like for example, Matsya Avatar. What's the story of the Matsya Avatar, right? How the Matsya Avatar starts off as a tiny fish, and then gradually it grows. As Satyavrata, who's the king, takes care of the fish, it grows and grows and grows. It's showing us the spiritual connection that we can have, and how if we nurture that spiritual connection, we grow and grow and grow. And eventually Matsyavada is the one that saves us, right? And I've used the like the experience, like my experience with my master, the insights I've had with my guru, and that's why I've called it Avatars of the Master. And each of us has the guru, right? Sometimes he comes as a personality, sometimes he's within your heart, sometimes you can look at life as your guru. And so it's really about how divinity enters your life and how that plays out and the lessons that are learned within that. So that's really, it's a very devotional book. Yeah, Avatars of the Master. Yeah.
Brilliant. Good. I actually don't have that one, but I do have this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to move nicely onto this. The Hypocrite Within says, recognize the ego and return to your true self. What a tagline. That's great. So what's the essence of this book? Tell us, please.
So I'll tell you why. It's really about how we deceive ourselves, how we can deceive ourselves. And it's about how the ego uses different disguises, takes on different narratives, and therefore deceives us into believing things and misleading us. We think we're going in a certain direction, but the ego is telling us that makes us go in a different direction. And so the Hypocrite Within is about understanding the different disguises the ego adorns. And when we understand how the ego is working within us, we can see it and then rise above it. And it's based on the characters you said earlier, characters of the Mahabharata. So, and I've taken it to the point of the Kurukshetra, to the battlefield, right? And that's where everyone has to pick a side, right? When the conches are blown in Bhagavad Gita chapter 1, everyone has picked a side. And really it comes down to this. Are you with Krishna or are you against Krishna? Okay. Krishna is just playing the role of the charioteer. But if you're with Krishna, you're with Krishna. If you're against Krishna, then you are, if you like, an aspect of the ego that needs to be overcome. So I've picked Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Shakuni, Bhishma, and Karna as the different aspects, the different forms of spiritual hypocrisy that we can all get lured into. I've discussed how they play out using their narratives within the Mahabharata. I've discussed how they all have their version of Dharma, right? You know, Duryodhana, his version of Dharma, people think that Duryodhana is not Dharmic, right? And he isn't Dharmic, obviously, but like he has a vision of Dharma. He believes he is being Dharmic because for him, Dharma is about destroying your enemies and being number one, living by the law of the jungle, right? And like that, Shakuni is about, his version of Dharma is about being cunning, being one step ahead of your enemies, right? Karna has a vision of Dharma about always being loyal and compassionate, right? But all these narratives of Dharma, however good or however bad, they ultimately mean that they are against Krishna. And this is what the ego does. It uses narratives of Dharma within us to justify certain behavioral patterns. And the book is about going through those behavioral patterns, using each character, and then finally rising above them.
Nice. I mean, I'm just going to just read a little bit from the contents. Like you've got the ego, the foundation of all hypocrisy, the Mahabharata, the playing out of our inner world, and then you've got Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari. So I just wanted to focus on hypocrisy a little bit before we go into the details of your book itself, because there's an idea within Vedic thought that just as there are seasons that we go through, like spring, summer, autumn, winter, there are seasons that the universe goes through, and actually the current season is Kali Yuga. And just as in winter we get symptoms of, we get the cold, right? Because the environment helps the cold, the bacteria and the viruses to grow. So in Kali Yuga, the hypocrisy is able to grow. So it's like that. It's like the environment of Kali Yuga is such, like the fickle nature of the mind, the attachment to the ego, and all of that. So just as a foundation, could you help us understand hypocrisy? Like where's hypocrisy coming from? Like, is that something you could expand on?
Yeah. So hypocrisy, it comes down. First, we have to understand what the ego is, right? And that's the big thing, because I know everyone has different interpretations of what ego might mean. So in the book, I've outlined that at the beginning, that essentially we are the eternal transcendent self. We don't belong to this world. We belong somewhere else, with Bhagavan, with Krishna, with God. That's where we are an eternal fragment of his being, right? But we have a false identity. There is this layer of a false identity covering our Atman, our divine self. And that makes us have the instinct that we belong to this world, that I'm a material person, I am a dentist, I am a family man. And, all these identities, that becomes the reality of who we are. That's the false identity. But then from childhood, and who knows, from previous lives, right? There are so many different experiences, so many different samskaras, impressions in our psyche that are left. I'm not good enough. I deserve better. Nobody likes me. Everybody likes me. Whatever it is, so many different impressions and ideas imprinted in our psyche. And these impressions come together and coalesce. And I describe it like raindrops coming together to form a cloud, water vapor coming to form a cloud. And that becomes the ego. And then the ego almost acts like an independent entity within us. It's almost like we're possessed, right? And it can be like that. It can be like when you take a step back and look at yourself and how irrational and how immature sometimes we can be. It's a form of possession. right? And I don't want to sound like it's an exorcist kind of like demonic. I don't want to go down that road, but like in a way, it is a form of possession. And so the ego then sits below our personality, and our personality is what we superficially understand about ourselves. I understand that I'm Myuran. I'm a rational person. I like this, I like that. And you might know some of your insecurities and so on, but it's usually at quite a superficial level. But the ego works underneath that. And then with that, unless we are conscious, what happens is it ends up manipulating our personality and coming out. So when somebody says that awkward comment that really nudges you, you find yourself exploding into irrational behavior. And everyone's looking at you going, Jessel, Myuran, why do you react like that? Where's that come from? And it's because that one of those landmines has gone off, right? The ego underneath has perked up and exploded. And like I said, when you live from the ego unconsciously, you are on repeat, constantly going round on repeat. And then what happens is if you don't understand that's going on inside of you, you can think on your spiritual path that you have put Krishna on the altar. You have put Narayana on the altar, and you're doing arati to Narayana on the asan, on the throne. But really, it's your ego in disguise. And that's the biggest tragedy that can happen on the spiritual path, that we do everything, right? We do our service, we do all these kind of things. We think we're on the right path, but because we're so unconscious and unaware of how our ego's disrupting everything, we are actually doing swaha to our ego, right? And we are empowering our ego. And this book is really a collection of experiences, a collection of insights I've had over 16 years of being with my spiritual master. Because when I've been with my spiritual master, when you're in front of divinity and when you're in front of truth, naturally the floodlights come on the ego, and it actually gets amplified. And you actually see it clearly. And so the experiences I've had and the insights I've had in myself, in those around me, I've collected them together, organized them under these characters, and played them out in the book to help anybody on their spiritual path, whatever path that is, to help them recognize it and rise above it. But that's what the ego does, is it makes us believe we're advancing towards God, to the truth, but is actually taking us in the opposite direction.
It's a tricky little thing, yeah. The ego.
Yeah, I really enjoyed writing because it was a huge self-analysis, huge meditation for me. I had to relive a lot of my experiences, and but it was fascinating to write about it.
So just to reflect on what you just said about the ego, it's like, we go to these dental conferences. I remember sitting in a chair.
Well, you do. I don't think I do very much.
You haven't got time. Yeah. So I remember sitting in a chair, and I just nipped out to make a phone call. And when I came back, someone else was sitting in the chair that I was sitting in. And I straight away thought, that's my chair. Right. That's how quick the ego works.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
but you see how quickly I and mine, that was my chair, suddenly came up from nowhere, right?
Exactly. And that is interesting, because there's this idea of bhakti, or love and devotion, and then you have nishta bhakti, right? Steady devotion. And actually, we've got to clear these obstacles, and this obstacle of the ego is huge, because, like you said, you place the Lord on the throne, and actually you want everyone to see you placing the Lord on the throne, and that is actually your own arrogance, actually, in one sense. That's like a trick of the ego.
Absolutely. Or you can play the role of, I want to be so humble. I am so humble. I just want to take the dust off your feet. I'm so humble. And then suddenly you just become so self-obsessed about your own humility. And that's another form of the ego, right? And what I think, reason why I wrote the book is there is so much literature, good, fantastic literature on glorifying our spiritual path, the bliss you can have within, really helpful things. But there's very little, I think, like head-on tackling the ego in all its glory and really tackling it head-on. And I feel like it's actually another side of the coin of the spiritual path, that the glory of God and the bliss of God is one aspect, but this is the responsibility we have to take going forward in our spiritual path, if we're seriously walking a spiritual path.
So you said this lovely word swaha, which is like offering of the self, and there's another term which is swadha, which is like self-mastery, and it's like with hypocrisy, it's like to tackle that. I'm thinking off the top of my head. It's like if we're governed, like we're dentists, so we're governed by the General Dental Council, or doctors are governed by the General Medical Council. So when we know someone's watching our every move, we can kind of stay on the straight and narrow. But for the ego, like what is that? Do we have to have some sort of self-mastery there? Is that kind of governance? Because, you know, the more we ascend and the more we advance, you know, arrogance or pride can come in. So is it about being attentive to that? What would you say about something like that? I'm just thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, what is government? We have to question ourselves about whether we want God or not, whether we want to advance or not. That's where it comes from. Because either on the spiritual path I'm talking about, either we take responsibility for ourselves and we take that kind of self-governance, right, over ourselves and be vigilant about what's happening inside of us, or what can happen is we leave it in the hands of Maya, right? And this is something I've witnessed so many times in the spiritual path, in different scenarios, because either you realize that there is something that I need to work on, and I come to terms with it, and I try and move past it, or the Lord instructs Maya, right? And then, but it's much more harder when Maya deals with your samskaras than if you deal with it. And I kind of use the example of, like, it's like taking your tooth out, right? It's a difficult process, but if you numb up the patient, it's a pretty straightforward process. If you don't use anesthetic, it's pretty difficult, right? I don't know how many times, I've never tried it, by the way, but it can be a really traumatic experience. So we have to question ourselves, right? And really say, look, I've been given this wonderful opportunity of life. Somehow I've come on this path of spirituality. This knowledge has come my way. Do I want to seize this opportunity? I mean, Guruji was talking about this today in his satsang, that do I want to seize this opportunity? And if I want to seize it, that means starting the Kurukshetra war, holding Krishna's hand and letting him drive our chariot and facing these characters. We have to start chapter 1 of Bhagavad Gita, right? That's how it works.
I just wanted to just maybe speak to the viewers who are watching, just reflecting on the way this is written. So it's what it isn't is basically like just the story of the Mahabharata. So if you feel like, oh yeah, I know the Mahabharata, so I don't necessarily need that. It's almost like a meta analysis, just extracting the elements of the ego. And there's like nice practical tips, practical steps that have been put in there. So like there's there's like a reflection, and then a practical step. Is that fair to say? It's like a meta-analysis of what's going on.
I mean, Avatars of the Master is an internalization of the Leelas of Narayana, of those in the Bhagavatam. The Hypocrite Within is an internalization of the Kurukshetra battlefield in many ways, right? I realize Gandhar is not quite on the battlefield, but she's got her role to play, certainly. But anyway, it's an internalization of that process. So it's about making the Mahabharata not just a series of not superficial lessons, but much, much, much more deeper. And I'd really try and go deep into these characters, because those characters exist within us. And I really want the reader, and I hope they can. I want the reader to really see that these characters exist, and to see, most importantly, that they are ultimately not these characters, right? That's the critical point. And I often say, right, it takes one to know one, right? There's a reason why I wrote this book, because I can see these characters within me, right? And I'm looking at these characters, and I also, in seeing them, I recognize that they are not me. And that's a stunning realization, because it gives you real authenticity and sincerity on your path. Because you see those tricks of the ego, like you were talking about earlier, and then you realize, yes, it's like, Sankhya philosophy, right? Sorry to get too philosophical, but Sankhya philosophy, like chapter 13 of the Gita, is all about analyzing material nature, dividing it up into different categories, and saying these are the 5 elements, these are the 5 senses, the 5 organs of action, all these different elements, and then realizing I am different. I am different. I am the spirit self. I am the knower of the field. I'm not the actual material. I'm nothing to do with material reality. In the same way, when I analyze all the different aspects of the ego, you realize, Anyoham, I am different from the ego. I belong to God. I belong to my guru. I belong to the divine, right? And it gives you that purity. And that really comes home in the last chapter.
So we've got a few minutes left. Did you want to share some snippets from your book? I've got some. I did take some photos of it. So there was one bit we're reflecting on Bishma, and then also at the end it comes to this point of surrender. I don't want to spoil it for the viewers, but also I'm just conscious that if you want to reflect on like some points on Bishma.
No, I don't mind. Like, I mean, you can go ahead. To be honest with you, you can read out a snippet, but there's a lot going on around any snippet you read out, so it's fine.
Okay, hang on. I don't want to read the wrong bit. Okay, once he has clapped. Okay, so there's one bit about Bishma. It is important to note that the defeat of Bishma is not the death of Bishma. Once he has collapsed onto his bed of arrows, he's removed from Duryodhana's control and is free to be himself. At the end of the war, Krishna tells you this as a matter of urgency to go and learn from this wise man before his knowledge is lost to the world. Similarly, our aim is not to destroy tradition, but to eradicate the ego's influence. So this is on a section on appreciating tradition.
Yeah.
That's what Bishma represents. You're right reflecting on something like that?
Yeah. I mean, so Bishma is the hypocrisy of dogmatism, right? When we become so entrenched in rules, regulations, even philosophy, tradition even, we become so entrenched in it that we actually forget about God altogether. And it can happen like that. So you can do your japa, you can do your 16 rounds every day. You can serve your deity. You can serve in the temple and in your sangha and so on. You're ticking all the boxes. And in yourself, you feel like, yeah, I'm doing everything I should. And Bhishma, he is that person who is dharmic to the core, right? He knows what dharma is. He gives Yudhishthira untold knowledge on dharma. He knows what dharma is, but yet he's still against Krishna. And this is the danger that we can fall into. And that chapter analyzes the different scenarios that come about, that we can tick all the boxes of the spiritual path, but we actually miss Krishna himself in the process. And it comes back to what we talked about earlier. We're unwilling to trust that heart. We're unwilling to trust that connection we have with him because we're so besotted with the externals or trappings of religion that we don't actually internalize anything. And it's like we bought into the brand of the product, but not the product itself. Right. So you kind of like you buy into the whole thing about what it is to be a Vaishnava. And this is a trap that we can both fall into. We buy into the whole thing of being a Vaishnava, but we forget about Krishna. We forget about Narayana. Right. And then we miss the whole point. So Bhishma has understood Dharma to the nth degree like no one else has, but he's still fighting against Krishna. But interestingly, Bhishma is the only commander of the Kaurava army who's not killed, if you don't include Ashvatthama at the end. But Drona gets killed, Karna gets killed, Shalya gets killed. Bhishma survives. But what happens is, after the war, he ends up discoursing to Yudhishthira. He tells him about the glory of Krishna, the Vishnu Sahasranama. He tells him everything. So Bhishma, once he's rescued from Duryodhana, then he speaks the truth, right? And we need to rescue Bhishma from Duryodhana. And then tradition serves us. Then what is in our heart becomes amplified by tradition. It grows. It is fed. It is nourished, and then it just goes into this huge thing. and Krishna becomes real for us through the lens of Vaishnavism. But if he's not rescued from Duryodhana, then we can get lost and we miss Krishna altogether. And so this is what this chapter goes into in that session.
Yeah, I'm just going to reflect back. I know we're only a little bit of time left, but I think we could speak till midnight. But so last a few weeks ago, we had Bishma Stuti for our students. So only the students who were
beautiful,
yeah, beautiful. And we were talking about that same thing, that Bishma represents like the deontological person, the person who just sticks to the rules and regulations. And it's easy to distinguish between what is good and what is bad, but it's difficult to sacrifice the good for the great. So it's like Bishma is too strict on these, what you're saying, the rules and regulations. It's beautiful the way you actually say that when he's freed or is emancipated from Duryodhan, the dirty fighter, that actually tradition serves us. That's beautiful. What I'd like to do is, if you don't mind, go ahead.
There's just one point I want to add to that. So, I mean, Guruji was talking about this a few days ago, that sometimes when we have so much knowledge of what bhakti is, we have a certain interpretation and of what that is in our head, but it's in our mind, right? And then when our heart starts to actually flower into something, instead of allowing it to flower, we judge it with the mind, thinking that doesn't follow exactly what I know in my head, right? So therefore you ignore it and you suppress it. And that's what can happen sometimes in that Bhishma complex. Whereas I can only speak for myself on this, but what's happened with me is when I first met my spiritual master, that conviction flowered first. And then I went to the Bhagavad Gita. Then I went to the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then I realized that what Krishna's words are reflecting that taste I've already had. And then, like I said, it amplifies it and makes it grow. And then I look at the Bhagavatam and the Leelas of the Bhagavatam, and I suddenly realize that is the summit of bhakti. That tiny taste I've had, that is the summit of it played out through these Leelas and these narrations. And so this is what I mean by Agyana Timirandasya, right? The Guru opens the eyes, you get that divine vision, and then you can see the Shastra, the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and you see them with fresh eyes, and you see Krishna, Narayana there, the God there. And this is the thing, this balance is what we need to strike.
So is it okay if we just finish on a little bit about surrender, or Sharanagati, as you put it so nicely in your book, without giving too much away, because I want people to get the book and actually analyze their own ego, conquer it as well. But I think it's really nice how you end so nicely on Draupadi.
Yeah, I mean, Draupadi, those of you who know the Mahabharata, there's the famous scene of the gambling scene where she's dragged in mercilessly by Dushasana and she's beaten and then she's disrobed. And what's interesting is she has pretty much all the characters there in front of her. She's surrounded. She's like a deer amongst the wolves, right? And she is completely and utterly helplessness. She's completely helpless. And if there's one thing, one doctrine, if you could say to me, like, Myuran, what's the one kind of spiritual teaching that you like to push forward? It's got to be the path to helplessness, right? And in Sri Vaishnavism in particular, they call it prapati, right? Like taking refuge. Why does the Bhagavad Gita come about? It comes because Arjuna is helpless, right? And real sincerity comes when we realize, I am helpless. I am lost in this world. Death is going to come for you, for me, for everyone. We're fools if we believe it otherwise. But we think that we're going to live forever, but that's just madness. And nothing is in our hands. And when you fully contemplate on the nature of life, you become utterly helpless. And when you see the different facets of the ego, you actually become helpless as well. And this is what makes us pure enough for grace to enter our life. We have to, when the walls are closing in, the heavens open, right? And that's where the shower of grace comes down. And that's what the Draupadi scene is all about. If you look at another famous quote that I always quote is Yamunacharya. He's like one of the famous Sri Vaishnava acharyas. before Ramanuja Acharya. And he says his defining declaration is, Lord, I don't have any idea of Dharma. I have no jnana, no knowledge, no wisdom. I don't have any bhakti. I don't have, this is a Vaishnava Acharya saying he has no bhakti. Okay. All right. And he's saying, I have no possessions. I'm a kinchana, one without possessions. Na anyagati, I have no other refuge. All I can offer you is a helplessness of a helpless soul. Right. That is prapati, that is sharanagati, that is sincerity. Right. And the last chapter is about how each of us can get to that state of that utter helplessness. I want the world to know about the power of helplessness. The irony of that statement, the power of helplessness, because that is what brings divine grace in. And I just feel like, yeah, if that's the one teaching I could give from my guru, from my life, that would be that.
That's nice. A metaphor comes to me. It's almost like the ego is like a bowl which is upside down, and you have to turn it that way to be able to allow the grace of the rainfall to come in and enter your life. Yeah,
because the sun is shining, right, but our backs are turned. This is the problem. Right? And once we're helpless, we can turn ourselves to the sun.
Brilliant. So I just want to finish by you just please telling everyone how they can actually get your book. Go for it.
Yes, so it's now on Amazon as of yesterday. It's in UK on UK Amazon. It's in America, US Amazon, and in Europe as well. There is the shop in the ashram called the Bhakti Shop, which also is selling it. BhaktiShop.com, I think. But otherwise, it's on Amazon. And you can get it from there, really. So Waterstones, I think, is coming soon at some point. So it'll be available there in the UK.
Just put the link on your publisher as well, Tattva Press. So there it is, tattvapress.co.uk. You can look there, products, and then Hypocrite Within, and then Mayuran's full name there. So thank you so much for engaging in this dialogue, cross-Sampradaya dialogue. Late at night, two dentists, not talk about teeth. You didn't mention teeth. Brilliant. I think
we did a little bit. We did a little bit.
Oh yeah, actually you did.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. But next podcast, everyone, is 9 p.m. again, Monday, 19th of April, 2021. Are there any final words? Just one last thing that you might want to just say to our students as they indulge in studying Vedanta, studying Bhakti Shastras. What advice would you give?
I would just say, have a goal, have an aim, and organize your life to that aim and strive for that aim. And I would say, make God that aim if you can. Make truth, supreme truth, that aim. Believe, have that trust. And if you don't believe, pray for that trust, so that your knowledge becomes experiential and real. It doesn't just stay up here. So pray for that grace to come into your life that reveals that you can actually achieve what Krishna is talking about in the Bhagavad Gita, and that is being played out in the Bhagavatam. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Right, I'll leave you to it. Thank you so much.
Jai Gurudev, Jessel. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Hare Krishna.